Thank you.
Now, the Premier League is holding an emergency meeting today to discuss future fixtures in the face of the coronavirus. Let's speak to our sports correspondent, Martha Kelner. She's at the Premier League headquarters in central London. Martha, what's your sense that this meeting might bring as an outcome?
I think you have to lean towards saying that there'll be a suspension of the Premier League season in some shape or form, whether that be a suspension for 2 weeks or a determinate amount of time or an indefinite suspension. And it really follows the most remarkable 45 minutes late last night. At first, we had the Premier League saying that they were acting on government advice, and as per that advice, the Premier League season would continue as normal. Shortly after that, we got word from Arsenal Football Club saying their coach, their head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. And that news really is likely to shape what this Premier League season looks like. We then woke up to the news this morning that the young Chelsea player Callum Hudson-Odoi had also tested positive for coronavirus. So you have two Premier League clubs, Arsenal and Chelsea. Both have their respective training grounds shut. Both of their first teams are in isolation, and any staff members who both of those individuals have come into contact with. So you really can't see a way that this Premier League season can go ahead as normal. And we're having this meeting, people are on teleconference calls, executives from all of the 20 Premier League clubs. That's starting around 10:30, we think, to discuss what they do with the Premier League season. And it wasn't really a shock last night when the Premier League said that they were going to continue as usual, because they have all along been following this government advice. And Boris Johnson, when asked why he wasn't stopping sporting events, said there was no medical, no epidemiological reason to halt the seasons at that point. But just to give you an idea of how out of step that advice is with the rest of Europe, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Portugal, France have all suspended their seasons. Germany's Bundesliga, their top league, playing behind closed doors as it stands. So you expect the Premier League to follow a similar route. We're also just hearing that the EFL clubs will also have a board meeting this morning, and they're expected to fall into line with whatever the Premier League does.
OK, Martha, thank you.
Football's Premier League is holding an emergency meeting today to discuss the future fixtures this season in the face of the coronavirus. Let's go to our sports correspondent, Martha Kelner, who's at Premier League headquarters in central London. Martha, Prime Minister says carry on, but Premier League, or at least some of it, running into problems already in keeping up with the fixtures calendar.
Hi, Adam. Yeah, I am, as you said, outside Premier League headquarters in central London. The chief executive, Richard Masters, is inside the building behind me, poised to hold the most important meeting of his life. He's been in this job less than 6 months, but this really will be a monumental move for him. All the 20 Premier League chief executives will be on that teleconference call starting at 10:30, in which they'll have to make a decision about what to do with the remainder of this Premier League season. As you alluded to there, the Premier League said late last night that they would continue with the scheduled fixtures as normal, as per the government advice. Boris Johnson, of course, questioned yesterday about why he was still letting big sporting events go ahead. His response to that was that there was no epidemiological reason, no medical reason why those events shouldn't continue with the full complement of crowds in those stadiums. But then, just shortly after that, Arsenal released a statement which could change the face of this season. They revealed that their head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. We then woke up to the news this morning that Chelsea's young player, Callum Hudson-Odoi, had also tested positive for coronavirus. That means that both the Arsenal and Chelsea first-team squads and any staff members that have come into contact with them are in self-isolation at the moment. Both of their respective training grounds shut down. There's also some Leicester players and some Watford players in self-isolation. So it's hard to see how this Premier League season could continue as normal. So we are expecting, when this meeting lets out, probably around midday, but possibly later, for a suspension to be announced The big question is, will it be a determinate amount of time that this Premier League season is suspended for, or will it be suspended indefinitely? Whatever happens, we really are in uncharted waters at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Martha. You're watching All Out Politics. Coming up next. And we can go now to our sports correspondent, Martha Kelner, who's at Premier League headquarters for the latest. Martha, what is the breaking news?
Hi, Adam. Yes, as you said, I'm outside Premier League HQ. So they're discussing in about half an hour from now what happens with the domestic game. But we're just getting news in from European football's governing body, UEFA, saying all Champions League and Europa League fixtures next week are called off. So this is a fast-moving, fluid situation. Just to give you a picture of what's happening with the Premier League, we got the news late last night that Arsenal's head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. We then woke up to the news this morning that Chelsea's young player, Callum Hudson-Odoi, had also tested positive for coronavirus. That's meant that both the Arsenal and the Chelsea first teams, their entire first team squad, are in self-isolation, along with any staff members who they've come into contact with. Both of their respective training grounds are shut at the moment. We're also hearing this morning that Everton's entire team are in self-isolation after one of their players displayed symptoms of the coronavirus. Other things that have happened this morning: Watford and Leicester, part of their teams are in self-isolation. So Richard Masters, the Premier League chief executive, he's inside the building behind me. That meeting about to start over teleconference. There'll be representatives from all 20 Premier League clubs on that call, and they'll have to decide whether to suspend the season immediately and for how long. So it could be that we get a determinate amount of time that the season is suspended for, or it could be an indeterminate suspension of that season. But it does seem inevitable, as this news continues to come in about players and managers testing positive, that we will get a suspension of some sort. Now, the Premier League had been hoping to continue following government advice, which was that all large-scale events can continue to go ahead. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said yesterday that there was no epidemiological, no medical reason why these events couldn't continue to happen. But that is out of step, whether rightly or wrongly, with what we're seeing in major football leagues in the rest of Europe. Just to give you a list of the teams which have already suspended their top leagues: Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, and now France this morning have all suspended football for the time being. Germany playing behind closed doors, but expected to follow suit. When we hear from this Premier League meeting after it's finished, we expect around midday, but possibly later. You have to imagine that a suspension is the only possible course of action. It really is unprecedented times for sport in this country and worldwide.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Martha, for that. More breaking news now on sporting fixtures. Heard today that the England Test cricket team are on their way home, and that Test match series has been postponed. Back to Martha Kelner, who's at Premier League headquarters in London.
Yeah, hi Adam. My understanding is that the EFL and the Premier League are set to announce that all matches across all competitions in English football will be postponed until at least April. At that point, they will take a view on whether they need to suspend games further. Now, my understanding is that this is due to safety of the players as opposed to the crowds at those matches. The Premier League had hoped to continue playing football as per government advice until at least the next few weeks, but that's become increasingly unlikely and to some extent impossible with events overnight and into this morning. We heard late last night that the Arsenal head coach Mikel Arteta had tested positive for coronavirus. We then woke up to the news that Chelsea's young player Callum Hudson-Odoi had also tested positive for coronavirus. Both of those teams, their entire first-team squads and the staff that had come into contact with their players were placed in self-isolation. Their training grounds were shut. We've then, in the last hour or so, heard that Everton's entire first-team squad are also self-isolating. So it became increasingly unlikely that we would see football continuing in this country as normal. There is a meeting ongoing in Premier League HQ behind me at the moment where clubs will vote on that suspension, but we are expecting them to be suspended until at least April the 4th. That will keep them in line with leagues across Europe: Italy, Spain, France, Netherlands, Portugal, all already suspended. English football set to join them. It really is an unprecedented situation in sport across the world.
Martha, thank you very much indeed for that update. English professional football put on hold.
Welcome back. Now, the FA, the Premier League and the EFL have collectively agreed to postpone the professional game in England until the 3rd of April at the earliest. And some breaking news as well coming to us in the last half an hour from Scotland. The SPFL has also announced the postponement of this weekend's and the following midweek fixtures there. Well, our sports correspondent Martha Kelner is outside the Premier League headquarters in central London for us. Martha, we're thinking that there's going to be some kind of press conference, but in the meanwhile, we're not going to be seeing football matches on our screens for a little while, at least.
Yeah, it really has been an extraordinary, unprecedented morning. I'm stood outside the Premier League HQ in central London, as you mentioned. There's lots of media here waiting to see whether we hear from the Chief Executive, Richard Masters, to talk about that decision to suspend all English football, including the top flight, until at least April the 3rd. It means there'll be no FA Cup ties, no Women's Super League, and also the postponement of an England friendly that they were supposed to play at Wembley against Denmark. It really is uncharted water that we're in at the moment. And as you mentioned, the Scottish FA similarly announcing no professional, but also no grassroots football for at least the next few weeks. And really, this situation couldn't have been predicted late last night. That was when the Premier League released a statement saying, effectively, it's business as usual for this weekend. They said they were taking that government advice that Boris Johnson elaborated on in his press conference yesterday, that there was no epidemiological reason, no medical reason why football couldn't continue to go ahead. But it was a statement from Arsenal late last night that has changed the face of this Premier League season. That was that their head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. We then woke up to the news this morning that Chelsea's young player Callum Hudson-Odoi, an England international, had also tested positive for coronavirus. And that really made this weekend's fixtures untenable, because we heard that Arsenal and Chelsea's full first-team squad and staff members were going into self-isolation. They were then joined by the Everton squad. We then had Watford, Leicester and Bournemouth players also going into self-isolation. So the idea that the Premier League season could continue really was a ridiculous one. Now we hear the news that they're falling into line with the rest of Europe. The likes of Italy, Spain, France, Netherlands, all suspended their seasons for now. The question next is, what happens to the rest of sport? We've heard 2 Grand Prix upcoming have also been cancelled, but attention will turn to Euro 2020, the major European football tournament, which is being held across the continent this year. 12 different countries set to host fixtures. There are suggestions that may be delayed another year to allow the domestic leagues to finish their fixtures. And then the attention will focus on the Olympics. At the moment, due to start in Tokyo on July the 24th, the International Olympic Committee say that will still go ahead, but pressure will mount as sports across the world react to the continued spread of coronavirus.
All right, Martha, thank you.
Christian, just a final question.
We're going to take you live to central London. We're expecting a statement from the Premier League. That is Christian Purslow from Aston Villa.
Mr.
Our
Purslow,
correspondent,
are you concerned that
Martha
Aston
Kelner
Villa
there, trying to get
relegation?
some sort of word from him. He's being somewhat taciturn there since the announcement that all English football matches will be postponed until at least the 3rd of April. Let's speak to Martha now. All credit to you, Martha, for trying to get him to say something, but he didn't have much to say, did he?
No, it's all very chaotic here. He's just shut off. That is the Aston Villa chief executive, Christian Purslow. He decided to come down to London today. He was the only Premier League chief executive actually in the building with the Premier League's chief executive, Richard Masters, as those unprecedented decisions were made to suspend the Premier League until April the 4th at least. Now, it's particularly key for Christian Purslow because his Aston Villa side at the moment are in the relegation spots. So he won't want to see this Premier League season voided. He wants to be assured that the Premier League season will start again at some point and his club will have the chance to climb out of those relegation places. But as we're hearing just in the last hour or so, all professional and grassroots matches in Scotland postponed for about 3 weeks. The Premier League and the EFL in agreement that their matches will be suspended for at least the next 3 weeks. And that brings them into line with leagues across Europe. Italy, Spain, France, the Netherlands, they're all already suspended. So in many ways, it wasn't unexpected that the Premier League should do the same. And what really forced their hands was the news late last night that Arsenal's head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. And then the news that the young Chelsea player, Callum Hudson-Odoi, had also tested positive for coronavirus. That meant their entire first-team squads had to go into self-isolation. And then 3 or 4 other Premier League clubs have also followed suit as this coronavirus continues to have an effect across sport. I think we might be able to hear from Callum Hudson-Odoi, who posted a message to fans on his social media platforms to assure them that he was doing okay.
No, Martha, I think we can't bring our viewers that at the moment. But I mean, you're talking there about all football and starting to talk about other sporting events as well. Meanwhile, as per government's advice that sporting events can continue, events like Cheltenham are still very much on.
Yeah, that's right. And so this advice was not so much about the safety of fans going to the matches, but more the fact that it became completely unfeasible that you could continue this Premier League schedule with so many players in self-isolation and head coaches as well. But it will put pressure on the rest of sport to have a look. We've got the London Marathon coming up. We've got the Grand National in Liverpool. That's due to take place on April the 4th. So there's many other sporting events that will come under the spotlight. Euro 2020 due to begin on June the 12th. And also the big one, the Olympics, which is due to start in Tokyo on July the 24th. The International Olympic Committee at the moment saying that will go ahead, but it really is such a fast-moving, fluid situation. It's hard to predict what will happen on a day-to-day basis, never mind the weeks and months ahead.
OK, Martha, thank you. Very good afternoon to you. The Premier League and English Football League have confirmed that all matches will be postponed until the 4th and 3rd of April, respectively. Everton has announced that its entire squad and coaching staff are self-isolating. That's after a first-team player developed symptoms of COVID-19. Arsenal were already doing the same after the team's head coach, Mikel Arteta, also tested positive. The FA, Premier League, EFL, all association says the postponements include all matches in the Championship, League One and League Two, as well as all academy and youth team fixtures. In addition to that, clubs are being advised to suspend indefinitely all non-essential activities, which include, but are not limited to, player appearances, training ground visits and fan meetings. We're going to take you live now to Martha Kelner. Martha, if you were listening to the government yesterday, it sounded very much like sporting events should be unaffected by the new advice, but that's not what's happening, is it?
It certainly did. And all the league have said that they will act according to what that government advice is. And yesterday, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said in his press conference there was no epidemiological, no medical reason why these large-scale mass gatherings like sporting events couldn't continue as usual, which is why we had this advice, this missive from the Premier League late last night to say the Premier League schedule would go ahead as usual. But it was news from Arsenal Football Club just shortly after that their head coach Mikel Arteta had tested positive for coronavirus, which has changed the face of this season. We then heard this morning that Chelsea's young player Callum Hudson-Odoi had also tested positive for coronavirus. That meant that both the Arsenal and Chelsea entire first teams and any staff who they'd come into contact with went into self-isolation. That's continued into this morning. We've seen 7 Premier League clubs now have either full first team isolation or at least a few members of their players in self-isolation because they've showed symptoms of the coronavirus. Now, Callum Hudson-Odoi has released or has made a message to his fans on his social media platforms, assuring them that he's okay. And I think we can hear a little bit of what Callum was saying now.
Hi guys, as you may be aware, I had the virus for the last couple of days, which I've recovered from. I'm following the health guidelines and self-isolating myself from everybody for the week. I hope to see everybody soon and hopefully be back on the pitch very soon. Take care.
So you can see behind me there's plenty of media gathering. They're waiting to see if we can hear from the Chief Executive, Richard Masters, to explain a little bit more about why the Premier League have chosen to suspend football until at least April the 4th. That's 3 weeks from now. The Scottish FA also announcing that they're suspending both professional and grassroots football. It brings both England and Scotland in line with what's happened already across Europe. We've seen Italy, Spain, France, the Netherlands and Portugal all announce suspensions. And it really does also place a focus on what's happening across the rest of sport. Wales and Scotland's Six Nations match tomorrow still going ahead as we understand. Cheltenham today, the final day, the climax, the Gold Cup, that's still going ahead. Questions being asked about whether that is putting the public at risk. This is, of course, a fast, fluid, moving situation. So I'm sure this is not the last development that we'll get in the coming hours.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't be. And on that theme, I can bring you a little bit of breaking news now. The ramifications of this spreading virus going far and wide. This update coming to us from Clarence House, confirming that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall have decided to postpone next week's spring tour that they were due to be taking to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Cyprus and Jordan. That is owing to the unfolding situation with the coronavirus pandemic. It does go on to say that they remain in good health.
OK, I'm getting a couple of breaking lines as we are talking, and Wales-Scotland rugby has been cancelled, we understand. And the Masters golf tournament has also been cancelled. That was originally for April the 9th to 12th. That's been postponed. Inevitable, potentially. Let's bring in our sports correspondent, Martha Kelner, now with reaction to these latest developments, coronavirus continuing to hit the sporting calendar, Martha.
Yeah, it certainly is. Coronavirus laying waste to sporting fixtures, not just in this country, but across the world. As you've just mentioned, the latest The latest cancellation that we're hearing is Golf's Masters, one of golf's majors, which is always held at the Augusta National in April. That's been postponed, and we don't know when it has been postponed until, or if it will take place at all. And also Wales versus Scotland, which was the last surviving Six Nations fixture, supposed to be going ahead tomorrow. That has also been cancelled. It really is chaotic. We don't know when or where or if these sporting events will be able to be held, whether it be weeks in the future, months in the future, or not at all. I'm stood outside the Premier League headquarters in central London. You'll be able to see behind me, media still here. We had been hoping to hear from the Premier League's chief executive, Richard Masters, about the Premier League's decision to postpone games now until at least April the 4th. Unfortunately, we're not going to hear from Masters, but it really is a confusing time, because late last night we'd heard that the Premier League had intended to keep their schedule operating as usual. That was, they said, as per the government advice. Boris Johnson, of course, saying there was no epidemiological reason, no medical reason why these large-scale mass gatherings, such as sporting events, couldn't continue as normal. But then we had the news from Arsenal that their head coach, Mikel Arteta, had tested positive for coronavirus. We also woke up to the news this morning that Chelsea and England's young player, Callum Hudson-Odoi, had also tested positive for coronavirus, and that really forced the Premier League's hand. They had then Arsenal and Chelsea's full first teams all in full self-isolation. There are now 7 Premier League teams who are in full or part self-isolation. The season really did become untenable. The Premier League, for the moment, are saying that on April the 4th or before that, they will take a view on whether they're able to resume the season. But there's so many things up in the air. Liverpool on the brink of their first league title for 30 years. The promotion and relegation spots, which are so valuable in English football monetarily, they're still up in the air. Many teams will be wanting to see this season continue to some extent, but it's really unclear, with the spread of this virus so unpredictable, whether that will be allowed to happen. So it's not just the Premier League, it's not just football, it's sports across the board and across the world. We've still at the moment got a London Marathon scheduled to happen next month. We've still got the Cheltenham Festival ongoing. The final day is today. We've got horse racing's Grand National coming up next month. But at the moment, there is so much uncertainty, and not least about the Olympics, which is due to begin on July the 24th this year in Tokyo. At the moment, that's going ahead. But as with everything in the sporting world at the moment, who knows if it will.
Martha Kelner, thank you. Meanwhile, the markets are making a tentative recovery so far today. The FTSE 100 opened up 3% this morning after suffering its worst day since 1987. It's currently up by around 7%. Let's get more on that from our business presenter, Ian King, who's in the city for us. And how are things looking at the moment, Ian?